The doors close, leaving the grim realities of the Great Depression outside. The lights dim, a symbol appears, greater than the globe itself. This giant beacon of hope emits an urgent alarm. A fabulous ride is about to begin. For the price of admission, you will be flown in a plane with 20 chorus girls strapped to its wings. Up to heaven, you're in heaven. In an Art Deco parallel universe of song, romance, and most importantly, dance. This is the Fred and Ginger universe. Or rather, given that this is the Ginger Rogers season, it's the Ginger and Fred universe. Here, you can expect fun set to music, where sentiment combines with absurdity. Black and white was never so colourful. Expect a strong dose of P.G. Wodehouse-style farcical high comedy, as slippery words lead to misunderstandings and mistaken identities. This universe is made up of 10 motion pictures, which share common threads and motifs. Near the start, Fred will perform a solo routine which establishes his dance credentials. He accidentally collides with a stranger, Ginger. She is as strong, knowing, and playful as he. He doesn't mean to irritate her, but somehow he can't help it. She is fired up against him, and he dances for her. Note, if they meet as old friends, we take a slight detour in which Fred is running a band and they tease each other. Dialogue leads to song. Song leads to dance. Dance leads to love. They fall for each other, but at different times. We meet other characters who further muddle the journey. If Fred buys Ginger flowers, it goes wrong. The image of love is an arrow piercing a heart, dripping with blood. This is a fine romance with no kisses, and no kissing is the order of the day. A marriage proposal is asked at the close, and if they marry, Ginger may have a black eye. And it's only at this point that Ginger and Fred sing at the same time. Previous cinematic musical worlds, such as those created by Busby Berkeley at Warner Brothers, aimed to transport the viewer to a euphoric and surrealistic realm of spectacle during the musical numbers. But this time in the clouds is cut short with a jolting thud when returning to the narrative dialogue portions of the film, as those stories looked to reflect the bleak and devastating impact of the Great Depression. In the Ginger and Fred universe, there is no place for the Great Depression. This is an intimate world built around the romantic charm of its stars and their brilliant dance abilities. Here, the dialogue is more stylized and has the rhythm and pace of song lyrics, which eases the transition from speech to song. Where Berkeley's dance creations are mostly presented on a stage, Ginger and Fred's more realistic dances can take place in a bedroom, in the park, or the engine room of an ocean liner. The world of Ginger and Fred was made by accident and might have been called the Dorothy and Fred universe. In 1933, Astaire was cast in his second film, Flying Down to Rio, opposite an actor called Dorothy Jordan. Jordan opted to marry RKO Studios boss Marion C. Cooper, leaving a role which was filled at the last minute by Rogers. Rogers and Astaire were old flames, having met 3 years previously, when Astaire was brought in to improve some of the dances in the stage show Girl Crazy, in which Rogers was appearing. They dated for a while, and Rogers wrote that they would have become a serious item had she not left for Hollywood. When making Flying Down to Rio, Astaire may have been the internationally renowned stage star, having been a professional dancer since before Rogers was born. But it was Rogers who had the experience of film technique, having already made 12 movies. Astaire wrote that Rogers was sweet and helpful, advising me about techniques in handling dialogue scenes for camera purposes. Their script gave a trivial direction for them to get up and dance, and what they did was to get up and revolutionize the film musical. Their performance of the karaoke, danced atop 7 white grand pianos, was a sensation. Now, let's see Ginger and Fred in action. Our first clip is Pick Yourself Up from Swing Time. Now, during the creation of the choreography, Rogers was frequently engaged, making other non-musical film productions, leaving Astaire and dance director Hermes Pan to collaborate on the dance making, with Pan filling in for Rogers. Rogers would join the process 6 weeks before shooting, with Pan teaching her the routines, this time taking Astaire's part. The process allowed Rogers to inject a fresh perspective and contribute ideas that would add the finishing touches. Astaire explained that each dance ought to spring somehow out of the character or situation. Otherwise, it would simply be a vaudeville act. And their dances aimed to be extensions of the characters' situations. In order to best help the transition from song to dance, Rogers and Astaire often start their routines walking naturally in time with the rhythm of the music. Now, this clip demonstrates how a dance can be integrated into the plot of a film. The situation here is that Fred has developed feelings for Ginger, who is a dance teacher. In order to meet her, he fakes that he cannot dance and is in need of her services. The ruse backfires, as Ginger's boss assumes Fred's clumsiness is as a result of Ginger's poor teaching skills. In order that she may keep her job, Fred now fakes improvement under Ginger's tuition. Now, in this clip, look out for Ginger's acting abilities, as at first she seems confused and rigid, and then amazed by Astaire's talent, dancing in spite of herself. Watch their excellent execution of bricolage, that is, the employment in the dance of items that are in the environment. In this case, it's the low white rail around the edge of the dance floor, which they leap over as if it wasn't there. Furthermore, despite the film's title being Swing Time, this song is actually to a polka rhythm. And the choreography tells you this, with Ginger and Fred launching the routine using the signature polka move of step, hop, 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 step, hop. Now, with 10 films made over a 15-year period, we're going to need to find our feet. So let's have a look at how the movies of the Ginger and Fred universe fit together. We start off in 1933 with Flying Down to Rio, which centres around the production of an airplane-themed musical entertainment. Ginger and Fred are cast as the second-string comedy couple. The Astaire persona is evident from this first appearance, and as the series progresses, it is Rogers who undergoes an evolution, playing a cheerful and wisecracking girl next door in Flying Down to Rio, and later on developing into a more complex character, capable of displaying both fragility and toughness. Where the audience saw magic, the studio saw dollar signs. And RKO expressed interest in making a further picture with the dancing duo. Rogers had no apprehensions about making further films with Astaire, whereas Astaire wrote to his agent expressing his reluctance to be teamed with Rogers again. Negotiations between the pair were made easier by the fact that they had the same agent, Leland Hayward, who incidentally proposed marriage to Ginger Rogers in a car as she was about to get married to somebody else. In 1934, the studio made The Gay Divorcee, This was the first film in which the pair received top billing. Cole Porter's Night and Day provided Rogers and Astaire with their first romantic duet and set the dance template for the rest of the series. 1935, we have Roberta. This Paris-set, fashion-themed film came from an existing stage show and was not tooled for Rogers and Astaire's talents, though it gave them the opportunity to grow as a double act and to flex their comedy muscles. Interweaving various threads from its predecessors, 1935's Top Hat was the first original film musical written for Rogers and Astaire. The plot features romantic misadventures in London and Venice, and it was to be their biggest box office success and their second highest box office earner of 1935. There was some criticism that the Rogers-Astaire movie's depiction of opulence at a time of austerity was not appropriate, and RKO responded by making Fred join the Navy to see the sea in 1936's Follow the Fleet. This is their longest movie together, and even the energy-sapping wooden presence of Randolph Scott as the lead and a lackluster script could not spoil the sparkle of their incredible dance routines. In the same year, the team made Swing Time, which casts Fred as a dancer and gambler, falling for dance teacher Ginger, whose affections are anything but a safe bet. The curious original choice of titles were I Won't Dance and then Never Gonna Dance, which would be a bit like calling Beyoncé's latest album I've Got a Touch of Laryngitis. The team's next project pitted the poise of ballet with the razzmatazz of Broadway. Originally titled Watch Your Step, then Stepping Stones, it was up-and-coming director Vincent Minnelli who provided the eventual title Shall We Dance? Whilst aiming to bring something fresh to the Rogers-Astaire material, the script also acknowledges that the partnership can't last forever. The team took a 15-month break to pursue solo projects. Astaire changed partners, making the musical a damsel in distress. It was not well received, and whereas Astaire's star was tarnished, being labelled box office poison in a movie trade paper, Rogers' star was glowing after she made the highly regarded comedy drama Stage Door opposite Katharine Hepburn. Now, to contextualise the place of the Rogers-Astaire films in Rogers' career, during the 6 years that they made their 9 RKO films, Rogers made 12 films without Astaire, and Astaire made 1 film without Rogers. The pair reunited for 1938's Carefree, which somewhat surprisingly explored the field of psychiatry. Although Rogers wrote that this was her finest role of the series, the short running time at just 83 minutes indicates a certain level of creative fatigue. In 1939, RKO announced that Rogers and Astaire's swan song was to be the story of Vernon and Irene Castle. It's their only film set in a bygone era and tells the story of a real-life married couple who were a popular dance act in the early 20th century. Although the biographical nature of the film leaves no place for comic misunderstandings or emotion in the dances, it did give the opportunity for both to showcase their acting abilities and for Rogers to demonstrate her progress as a dancer. As the cost of the Rogers-Astaire films increased, the box office returns decreased. Flying Down to Rio had cost $465,000 to make, and the story of Vernon and Irene Castle had cost $2 million. It was an unsatisfying, unexpectedly mournful end to their chronicles. Audiences who had been swept up into the Rogers-Astaire universe for 6 years, following their courtship over 9 films, were not presented with happily ever after, but were left with a bitter wreckage. With this, their final movie together, closing with Fred's on-screen death in a plane crash. The Bakelite ballroom fantasies of Rogers and Astaire were out of step with the harsh realities of World War II. It was time to call the whole thing off. Whereas Astaire's contract was allowed to run its course, Rogers was the rising star, winning the Oscar for Best Actress for 1940's Kitty Foyle. Astaire stumbled to find a post-Rogers identity, trying a string of different dance partners. Fortunately, he found his feet when teaming up with the MGM Freed unit, making solid gold musical hits once more. Fittingly, just as the Rogers-Astaire partnership had started by accident, they had an unplanned final chapter. In 1949, MGM was planning to follow up the Astaire and Judy Garland hit Easter Parade with a film called The Barkleys of Broadway. When Garland became incapacitated, it was Rogers who stepped in, and in doing so, enabled a more upbeat ending to the Rogers-Astaire series. In an echo of the supposedly real life of Rogers and Astaire, the team play a married couple, dance act who bicker, and forge separate career paths. Seeing the partnership back on screen must have reminded audiences of the carefree pre-war era. This new iteration of the Rogers-Astaire partnership was a little older, more technically polished, but also more satirical, more arch, more self-referential. Time for another clip. And now we'll have I'll Be Hard to Handle from Roberta. Put incredibly simply, the Rogers-Astaire dance style involved all-over body movement and blended the grace of ballet in their upper bodies, the romance of ballroom in their partner dancing, and the jazzy percussion of tap in their feet. Astaire used unpredictable, rhythmically inventive tap phrases and understood that film enabled his audience to be able to follow the intricate dance steps better than you could on stage. Now, the dances tend to wind down at the close, with the movements merging back into the energy of the dialogue sequences. They may slip into chairs or collapse exhausted on the floor. In this clip, the context is that Fred has just bumped into old flame Ginger. The dance is shot in a single take and recorded as live. There are no overdubs. This adds to the feeling of impulsive spontaneity. The playful laughter you hear is genuine, whereas the previous clip, Pick Yourself Up, was in one tempo throughout. Here, the tempo chops and changes. This dance is a conversation in tap, and in just 2 minutes, it runs through call and response with the band, comic exchanges, a challenge dance, and finally, happy, joyous exhaustion. It's a dance which charts an emotional change. They start as old friends and end as soulmates. Watch out for the moment where Rogers misses a step, Fred continues, but she styles it out. I genuinely love the imperfections. It's very rare for Astaire to let imperfections appear on screen, and I think there's a reason he chose that. He wanted it to look impulsive. So, who created this world which showcased the shimmering talents of Rogers and Astaire? It was producer Pandro S. Berman who had the vision of making a series of films. As the films were made in quick succession, each borrowed freely from its predecessors. And rather than being the result of a lack of creativity, I like to think that this is each film building on the last, like a house of cards. The most active scriptwriter was Alan Scott. Scott was a Rhodes Scholar who lectured for the Theatre Guild on the likes of Eugene O'Neill, and who brought a sophisticated polish from his experience writing for the theatre. The mood and tone of the songs lifted the audience to a higher plane of emotional enchantment. along with lyrics which provided generations of moviegoers with a lexicon for expressing romance. The songwriters included Cole Porter. Sadly, only one song of Porter's from the stage show The Gay Divorce was included in the subsequent film adaptation. Instead, RKO commissioned new songs for which it would hold the copyright and benefit from the commercial exploitation. The Rogers and Astaire Pictures created a songwriting team. Producer Berman brought in the lyricist Dorothy Fields to rewrite lyrics for Jerome Kern's music for Roberta. It was such a successful partnership that they became firm friends and teamed up again for Swing Time. Irving Berlin was the most prolific contributor, and his chameleon-like writing abilities supplied the Rogers and Astaire partnership with a musical blueprint for the series. George and Ira Gershwin crafted just one score for Rogers and Astaire, but what a score it was. And maybe they would have contributed more had George not died in 1937. With the script in place, it was up to the art department to create a look which was seamlessly integrated. Berman insisted on a glamorous look, and despite the odd wardrobe malfunction involving flying feathers and sleeves which hit Astaire in the face, Rogers' choice of dresses enhanced the mood and style of each dance. The clothes were designed to be seen against big white sets. The floors were shiny black Bakelite, which scarred easily. They were in need of constant polishing and were covered in cardboard during the rehearsals. The close of Top Hat supposedly takes place in Venice, but the Art Deco design is a long way from the realities of fascist Italy. This set took up 2 sound stages and encompassed canals, bridges, and practical gondolas. The water was dyed black in order to better contrast with the white set. Now, Astaire insisted that his dances be filmed in full body, with no cutaway reaction shots. The crew used what was termed the Astaire dolly, a device for moving the camera on small wheels, with a 40mm lens being just 2 foot from the ground. The dolly enabled that tight shot and needed to be kept a single constant distance from the performers throughout the filming of the dance sequences. Mark Sandrich, who directed most of the Rogers Astaire films, had a background in physics and enjoyed the technical challenges involved in making musicals, which suited his engineering mindset. To keep track of each production, he created a multicolored chart that organized the script by running time and color-coded activities. Whilst this may have improved efficiency, Rogers felt that Sandrich's scientific approach overlooked one important factor: empathy with his performers. The films established a company of supporting players with recurring roles. The magnificent Eric Blore, often portraying a flustered English butler to his bumbling employer, played by the king of the double take, Edward Everett Horton. Eric Rhodes's portrayal of flamboyant continentals saw his films banned by Mussolini. Absolutely true. And Helen Broderick played an older friend to Rogers and expressed exasperated tolerance through her raised eyebrows. Upon discovering that Edward Everett Horton earned twice as much as she, Rogers demanded and received a pay rise. And such was her star power at the time of making the Barkleys of Broadway that she was paid twice what Judy Garland had been receiving. Our final clip is the magnificent Never Gonna Dance from Swing Time. Astaire said that no one would believe him if he said, "I love you," on the screen. So he expressed it through dance. Despite miscommunication throughout the plot of their films, when Rogers and Astaire dance, their emotional state is plain to see. Rogers is remarkable at adapting her performance to give the dance what it requires, whether that means appearing unglamorous or letting Astaire take the spotlight, or being bedazzled by his dancing. This particular scene occurs at the emotional climax of the film and replays the plot in miniature. Ginger and Fred tremble with love for each other, but circumstances mean they cannot be together. Astaire vows, "I've danced with you. I'm never going to dance again." Whatever else he does will be something else, but it won't be dancing. In the Rogers Astaire universe, tap dance is used to punctuate and enhance feelings of joy and happiness, and here it's noticeably absent. Rogers acts through movement like never before. At the end, she must tear herself away, and Fred loses her forever. Shooting this routine was a challenge. It required the partners to whirl up 18 flights of steps in perfect unison, and Rogers revealed it took 48 takes to perfect it, with the final take being captured at 4 in the morning. Is there a way to summarize the magic of Ginger and Fred? The oft-quoted remark by Katharine Hepburn that he gave her class and she gave him sex appeal is too simplistic. With her less refined persona, Rogers brought a counterbalance to Astaire's aristocratic bearing. She was the swing time to his top hat. She said either, and he said either. And this made the couple acceptable to wider audiences. When they'd first met, Rogers asked Astaire for lessons, and under his tutelage, she was to become an expert dancer. So maybe it's more accurate to say she gave him less class, and he gave her dance class. Fred Astaire was at his best when he danced solo. But when he danced with Ginger Rogers, he was even better. Their stunningly intimate, wordless chemistry let the audience into an urbane, emotionally rich rapport that seemed somehow private and created a merged identity. It was circumstance that brought them to RKO. It was nature that made them both neat and slim. It was weeks of rehearsal that gave them polish, and it was experience that gave them the stagecraft to match each other's emotional tone. Rogers wrote, "Because we were so good together, the public tried to make something bigger out of our relationship, even when we were married to other people. Yet the Rogers-Astaire combined identity was bigger than the films they made." And if Ginger Rogers was at her best when dancing with Fred Astaire, then her receipt of the Oscar implies that she was even better when acting solo. And here's an afterthought. As Shall We Dance begins, you'll see the familiar RKO logo, and it seems to me as if those zigzag sparks striking out from the top of the tower evoke the electrical energy and charge of the dynamic on-screen chemistry between Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire. As our flight glides gently back to the earth, I've just got time to say I'm going to be watching the film with you guys. I'm not going to leave you high and dry. And I would genuinely love to chat afterwards about anything related to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, or anything just generally black and white and musical and incredible. If you've enjoyed the chat, tell your friends, everyone, that I've been Miles Eady. Check out mileseady.com for more of this kind of thing. And if you didn't enjoy the chat, tell your friends I've been Neil Brand. Enjoy the film.